Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's top 10 most underrated tames. In at number 10 is the Angler. Now this thing was released way back, and I do definitely fondly remember this thing from Squid's old Ark series, and his last episode on the Bongoman's Island map was taming the anglerfish, and still to this day this is actually a pretty useful creature for some certain specific Ark tasks, especially with their silica pearl gathering abilities, and that is pretty much all they have going for them. But silica pearls, if you didn't know already, are an extremely useful Ark resource, so that is why they are an extremely useful Ark creature which many people don't talk or even tame at all, and they just don't question it as a creature. They'll always go for something else. And yes, there are better sea creatures out there, but the Angler is great earlier on to mid-game stages in Ark, where you can't fully shell out for the most powerful ocean tames, but you still want to farm all of those silica pearls to get your fabrication up to the max. These creatures are really worth the tame at some point, as they aren't difficult at all, and they are extremely useful for gathering up all of those silica pearls. In at number 9 is the Chalicotherium. Now you may think this creature is just utterly useless, or you may think this creature is an absolutely insane tame and 100% worth it. And I'm kind of leaning more onto that side, as this creature does have a lot of abilities which many other creatures don't have. And also, the Chalicotherium has an absolutely insane knockback attack, and it is just a generally good creature for just dealing a lot of damage. It's a bit like a slightly worse Megatherium, which really does pack a punch, and it actually is a very decent travel mount as well. It has a very respectable speed stat, one of what you will not complain with at all, and it does have a wealth of other abilities as well, like it being able to throw literal rocks of, I think, even feces at the enemy player. But this ability will take some time to actually practice and get right, as it is a somewhat difficult ability to control, but when done right, it is a really fun, cool ability which does have many uses as well, as it essentially makes this thing a long-range fighting dinosaur, which many other Ark creatures simply do not have. The only one I can really think of off of hand is the Velonosaur's turret ability. In at number 8 is the Carbenemies. Now I know this will be a somewhat unpopular opinion among many of you, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, I really do enjoy the Carbenemies in the early stages of my Ark playing. In those early stages, it is extremely useful to get yourself a creature that can grind all of that oil and those silica pearls and all of those underwater resources. Yes, I will definitely agree this isn't the best creature out there to gather all of those berries and just harvest general things, as I'm pretty sure this thing can't even gather berries, but if it can, it is still an extremely slow Ark creature, which isn't great on land at all. But when it comes into the water, the Carbenemies does actually have some reasonable speed. And yes, just for reference, this B-roll does have some boosted speed on the Carbenemies, as I think it just looks really funny, and it definitely is really funny in my opinion. Comment down below if you think a really fast Carbenemies waggling its little legs really quickly is funny. You know, some people do, and I'm definitely one of those people. But yes, as you can see here in the B-roll, this is me going to gather some oil from the kind of depths of the ocean. Not obviously right to the bottom, as that wouldn't be great, as your player would simply run out of oxygen. As the time when you're getting the Carbenemies, you will not have the scuba tank. I'm pretty confident you won't. So yeah, you can always go into those lakes and lower lying rivers, and there you'll find some oil and definitely some silica pearls, and that is where I think the Carbenemies really shines the most. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. Now I know loads of people on my channel really do not feel as if the Beelzebufo is underrated, and they extremely love this creature, and they think it is one of the most popular Ark creatures. And among quite a lot of Ark players, the Beelzebufo is definitely very popular for its cementing paste gathering abilities. But the fact is, a lot of Ark players as well simply discount the Beelzebufo, and I was one of them before I tried it, as they will just simply say beaver dams are the most efficient way to gather cementing cementing paste, and there isn't a point of spending all of that time to get yourself one of these absolutely amazing, charming Ark frogs, which now obviously I've turned my opinion over is simply not the case. In insect caves like the one on the island, the Beelzebufo really does shine, and you can gather thousands and thousands of cementing paste. And with Ark being a buggy game as well, sometimes beaver dams don't even spawn and can be an absolute nuisance to find, so knowing that you can literally just find some insects on a Beelzebufo to get that cementing paste is actually extremely useful as well, where you just can't find beaver dams and you just can't find that cementing paste. The Beelzebufo is definitely the best creature out there for reliable, quick cementing paste gathering. In at number 6 is the Casteroides. Now again, you may be kind of on the edge like the Beelzebufo with this creature, as you may either love it or hate it. These creatures do seem to be quite Marmite creatures, as you may just not see the use in taming a Casteroides. But before you have the chainsaw in Ark, the Casteroides is one of the best creatures for gathering wood. And you all know wood is a resource which you will need a lot of throughout the game, right from the beginning all the way to the end stages of the Ark game. You will need all of that wood. The amount of wood that you will need in one Ark map playthrough is absolutely insane, and the beaver will really help you to actually get you there. And also the beaver is an extremely fast creature as well, and great in the water too, so it is a sort of upgrade to the carb enemies if you still can't get a creature that is underwater capable that actually spawns in the water, like the Megalodon or Ichthyosaurus or Plesiosaurus or Mosasaurus, which you may not have at the stage when you'll be taming these things. And also on top of that, they have an extra little special spicy ability as well, which makes them really nice to use. The fact is, their saddle is just a really nice portable smithy, extremely useful. In at number 5 is the Spinosaurus, and what a creature this is, and also in my opinion, what an underrated carnivore, as the Rex always seems to take the spotlight away from the Spinosaurus. And in my opinion, the Spinosaurus is pretty much what a Rex is, and in some cases it can be easier to tame, as it does spawn in less hostile environments, and it definitely has a lot of really great uses that the Rex simply can't partake in. Firstly, it has a really amazing turning circle, which the Rex simply can't compete with, as it can turn 360 on the spot, whereas the Rex's turning circle is absolutely atrocious, and in many situations it is so bad you can even get your Rex killed because it can't turn around and attack the creature that is attacking by its feet. Also, the Spinosaurus is great in the water too, and I'm pretty sure it does have an oxygen stat, even though it may not as well. I'm kind of a bit in between. It may have had one in the past and now it doesn't. Either way, its oxygen stat is really great, and it is a great underwater creature with creatures like the Baryonyx, the Mosasaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the Basilosaurus. The list literally goes on for underwater creatures, and unlike most underwater creatures and pretty much every creature apart from this and the Shadowmane, it has the hydration buff, so it will do even more damage when in water, which is just simply great, as with any carnivore you always like to have a buff. Sadly, it does not have the bleed ability, but still, that hydration buff is absolutely OP, and when it goes back onto its hind legs, this thing will do even more damage on top of that. It is definitely a great boss creature, and actually overall, I'm pretty sure it does more damage than the Rex, as it can attack faster, and I think its damage stat is higher. Its only real downside is its health is slightly worse than something like a Rex. In at number 4 is the Baryonyx. Now, this creature is definitely one of my favorites, and one creature that I will never forget in my Ark journey, and I'm surprised that so many other people don't talk about this to the extent that I do. And yes, it is not the most underrated creature out there, but I definitely think every single Ark player should have a Baryonyx in their roster of creatures, and they should know how to tame one effectively, efficiently, and know how to use one effectively as well. Yes, Shadowmanes are really great for caves now, but still the Baryonyx is my go-to 100%, as obviously its size means that this thing can fit into pretty much any cave. and compared to the Shadowmane, I'm just more used to using the Baryonyx, and yes, it may not be quite as versatile in terms of travel. In my opinion, this thing is still extremely useful and deserves a use, even though in some cases it is somewhat overtaken by the Shadowmane. Except the Shadowmane doesn't have the secret little ability that the Baryonyx has hidden up its sleeve. When it's in the water, it can literally stun creatures if you press C. And yes, the Shadowmane may have the hydration buff and things like that. The Shadowmane is a really great creature, don't get me wrong. It's just for things like caving and underwater exploration, I will always go Baryonyx before Shadowmane. And I would urge you to do that too. And also, they are a lot more accessible than the Shadowmane, as they do spawn on the island. Yes, I know the Shadowmane can be found on Fjorda, at least I'm pretty sure it can be found on Fjorda. So it is free to every Ark player out there, apart from Switch, I think doesn't have Fjorda yet, and obviously mobile doesn't. But on spawning on the island, it really does mean that this creature is the most accessible that it can be. Definitely worth the tame. In at number 3 is the Allosaurus. Yet again, another carnivore, which some people again may say they use all the time. But I really think the Allosaurus does not get the press that it really deserves, like the Spinosaurus and the Barry, as the Allo is by far one of the best boss creatures in Ark in general. And yes, the Rex may have more health, but the Allosaurus does an extremely immense amount of damage in packs, and it is just by far one of the most useful combat creatures in Ark. And with its pack buff, which obviously it will get from being in a pack, it can be buffed even more than a Rex can. And if you combine that with UT buffs on top of that, and the Daedon healing everything, you can have yourself a really great boss environment with Allos. And if you do breeding and mutations, you can have yourself an absolutely insane pack of Allos. And they don't tend to be as absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid as a Rex. These things will pretty much never get stuck on anything in the Ark terrain. And also, if you're doing the Overseer on the island, I would probably recommend bringing Allos, as getting through the tech cave with Rexes, just those Rexes, man, they will just get stuck in the lava and they will just die, and they'll just fall in the most stupid places, and it is really infuriating trying to retrieve them. So I will always use something like the Allo or the Spino if I'm feeling like it for the Overseer boss on the island. And I've only used Rexes once, and I completely regret it, as pretty much all of my army was killed in the tech cave, as all of the Rexes just decided, I don't want to live anymore, and I'm just going to jump straight into that lava. But obviously the Allo does not have any of those issues, and unlike the Rex, it has the all famous bleed ability. Definitely a carnivore to be proud and worth taming. In at number 2 is the Mantis. Now again, this is one of Ark's most accessible creatures, with this thing spawning on maps like Raasclark. And yes, albeit it may not have the easiest taming method out there, requiring you to passive feed it woolly rhino horns on Raasclark, or you can use Deathworm horns as well, and you will have to use Deathworm horns on the original map that it came on, which is Scorched Earth. And I get that many people do recognize the Mantis out there, but like the others, I really think everyone should have a Mantis in their roster, as some people may think it's just weak, useless, not worth it. Why even bother with all the prep and all of that just effort to get yourself some really good Mantises? And to that, I would say they are extremely great harvesters, and on a map like Raasclark, these are by far the go-to creature for gathering all of that mutton up. And they're definitely really fun harvesters to use as well. And pretty much any melee weapon that you can think of, apart from tech melee weapons, I'm pretty sure, these things will be able to wield and use to such a high level of ability. The only real downside to using a Mantis with your tools is the durability factor to it. But if you have Ascendant tools, then you'll have a really great time, as those weapons are not going to break as often. The Mantis is definitely a tame every Ark player should have in their roster, and one every Ark player should tame, and in my opinion, it doesn't get the support that it actually really needs. And finally, in at number 1 is the Carnotaurus. Now, many people wouldn't have expected this thing to be in the number 1 slot, but in my opinion, the Carno is my favourite carnivore in Ark. Yes, I prefer it even above the Baryonyx. The amount of nostalgia I have with this creature and the amount of success I've had with this creature is absolutely insane. And when I did Genesis 1 for the first time, I beat the Master Controller, albeit on Gamma, with the Carnotauruses, and it went extremely well, and it was an extremely fun and useful boss fight for me to have. The Carnotauruses are actually a very viable boss creature, albeit they won't do what a Rex, a Spino, or an Allo can. They are still a really good middleman for doing those Gamma boss fights, and you can definitely push for Beta and Alpha depending on what the fight is, just maybe not with the Master Controller. And did you also know that Carnotaurus, translated from Latin into English, means meatball, which is why I always call my Carnotauruses meatball, partly because it sounds funny, but also it is just accurate to what Carnotaurus actually means. Also, since the Carnotaurus' release, this thing has been TLC'd, now having a second attack where it will headbutt the enemy creature and deal that all-famous bleed ability, which only one other creature on this list so far, being the Allosaurus, actually has. And again, this is something that something like the Spino or the Rex doesn't have, which is why it is extremely useful to have yourself a Carnotaurus, and as always, call this thing Carny Dave. The top 10 best underwater Ark Tames. In at number 10, we have got the Mosasaurus, and I'm putting this thing here because really in today's age, it isn't the height of underwater travel like it used to be. The Mosasaurus is in some need of some TLC. It does lack a lot of inventiveness in its abilities, but it still is going to be a good underwater tame, and it's deserving of the list. The Plesiosaur is just slightly outside the bracket, so that creature is not making the list today, but the Mosasaurus just manages to squeeze in. It's not my favorite underwater tame by any means, but you can definitely get around on it quite easily, and there's a lot of good mobility and motion that you can get out of this creature. Like, you're still going to use a Wyvern even though they've got a bad turning circle because they're great flyers. It's kind of similar with this thing, but it's not quite the same because they aren't really as good as something like a Wyvern. A Wyvern is a much better creature, but Wyverns can't go underwater, so that's besides the point really. So next up, we have got the Ichthyosaurus. I was going to consider putting the Tuso in this spot as well. I don't really use it much as an underwater creature, but I guess I'll give it a brief honourable mention here because it still is quite a nice underwater tame, but it didn't make it on the list quite for me, but still, you know, it has good mobility and it is also quite a nice dealer of damage. The Ichthyosaurus, however, is just a speed demon when it comes to underwater travel. Yes, maybe not the fastest underwater creature we've got on our list today, but still one that can really get around, and most things won't be able to keep up with this thing whatsoever, which is why I like this as an underwater tame. Although it's not really going to be great for any kind of attacking or heavy damage dealing, that's really not what it's here for, especially considering it is a passive tame. It is one of the easiest creatures to tame on the list today, so it is definitely very deserving of this place, as considering how easy this thing is to tame, and also just generally how much travel and mobility you can get out of this creature, it is insane. And in my opinion, because of this, I'm putting them above the Mosasaur, because the Mosasaur really does need some TLC, like I mentioned before, whereas this is not really in any need of TLC. It's very good how it is, and it is so much easier to tame and so much more worthwhile. Coming up next, we have got the Megalodon, and this is one of those tames where I think they're actually quite underrated. Yes, it's not going to be the best underwater tame in existence. There are some creatures which I would definitely prefer over this, but I feel like considering how long it's been around for and actually what abilities it still holds, it is a very viable option. Maybe not for PvP, as that does tend to be quite a different world, and there are very specific tames that you'll be using for most of the time. At least that's my understanding overall. The Megalodon doesn't really come to too much play in that, but underwater creatures don't really anyway. And with this creature dealing the bleed ability, that is something which I really do hold home for PvE players, as it really does make a huge difference. It does for PvP as well, but again, it's not really relevant in that scene, at least as far as I'm concerned. The bleed ability just allows a new dimension of damage to be dealt with this creature, and on top of it, it is pretty mobile,
and it just makes it a nice, relatively small creature for defeating the Moda on Gen 1, especially considering you've got the X variants of these creatures and just general little fighting machines. In at number 7, we have got the Beelzebufo, and come on, this creature is definitely deserving of a spot on the list. It is small, relatively compact, and it is a dream in underwater scenarios. The speed that you can get out of this thing is absurd, and also the fact that it doesn't necessarily spawn in the water off the get-go means that it could potentially be easier for you to tame. The only real downside with that in this argument is that they do spawn in the swamp, but as long as you can find one that's, you know, more on the outskirts and still a reasonably high level, you're going to have a good time. Even lower level ones are still going to have that same speed. They're just going to sacrifice a lot on weight and health and some other important things that you might need in the ocean biome, because there are some pretty deadly creatures out there, and you know, it's a pretty harsh environment, so I would definitely be careful if you're on a lower level mount. They also are just insane cementing paste gatherers. It's not really going to make a huge difference for underwater travel, although you can just farm trilobites with these things, and that is my all-time favorite way to get cementing paste with these creatures. It's just the go-to for me, and I really love it for its speed, its overall general agility, and just being a relatively easy tame to get. Just an all-round great tame. Now, we all know the Maywing is great when it comes to general mobility. It pretty much tops every list that you could possibly put it on in that genre. Well, it really does do a great job as an underwater tame, and most people don't expect it. First, it can glide across the top of the surface of the water, and I find that to be quite an effective, useful ability, escaping danger that may be in the depths. And I know usually they don't come up all the way, but if you've got some jellyfish or some electric eels, yes, they can still shock you while you're on the surface, but you can get away much quicker. They also are just really fast swimmers as well. You probably wouldn't expect it out of these creatures, but trust me, they can definitely go for it, and you'll not be let down by the speed and agility and just general mobility that you get out of these things in any environment, that being underwater or not, which is why I'm putting them so highly on the list as well, because they're not only the best underwater tame really that could fit in this spot on the list, obviously not the best underwater tame out there because there's still 5 more creatures to go, but they're just so great in their ability to be great in the water and then great on the land as well. There's just a lot of versatility with these creatures, and hence why they're so high on the list, because you might say the Meg or the Beels is just a better underwater mount, but with the versatility, this is doing much better. In at number 5, we've got the Raasclark, and I feel like a lot of people forget that this is sort of an underwater creature. I know you probably wouldn't use it for that. It is an insanely great mount for general PvP use. It can wreck bases, and although its health can be pretty temperamental in some scenarios, it has been proven to be highly successful in that environment. Also, just from a PvE perspective, they are great for picking up a wealth of creatures of huge sizes like Rexes and Paraceratheriums. They also have a lot of speed and a lot of weight, so it makes them really amazing for metal gathering. It's just such a nice thing to have. Yes, we all know and love the RG, but the Raasclark in a lot of cases is just generally the nicer creature to use, and it is an insanely great fast swimmer. If you've ever taken this thing into the water, then you'll know you can still get a lot of speed and agility with this thing, and you still have all those abilities and heavy damage dealing that the Raasclark obviously has. I'm not sure if it has oxygen or not. I think it would, considering what it is. Well, it does have an oxygen stat obviously, so you probably have to be a little bit careful with that. I haven't been in the underwater environment for too long with this thing. I've just merely gone to skim down to some caves and things, so I haven't really paid attention to it. But again, that's something which you're probably going to want to pay attention to, and their tame method is something which you could consider quite exciting as well, which adds to the creature being so good. I don't know what it is, but with me, if they have an exciting tame method and the creature has an exciting tame method, then it really makes them even more fun to use once they've tamed, especially if it's like a lengthy process. It's not too difficult really for the Raasclark. It's way easier to turn like the Reaper, although it kind of follows the same tame method because it impregnates a dino of your choice. Choose a Bronto, really. I think it's the best one out there, I think, for effectiveness reasons, something like that. It's way easier when it's not you and it's a creature, and then you have to get all those resources instead of the XP which you get from the Reaper, which I don't think is as good of a system, but you know, still, honestly, it's not the hardest tame in the world, especially if you prepare, and it's still a pretty cool one, and I think it just adds to the general ambience of this creature on top of everything it already does. So continuing on, we've got the Spinosaurus, and it is no doubt that the Spino is a really great underwater creature. I'm going to give the Barry a brief mention here, as I haven't actually put the Baryonyx on the list, but I would put it around this spot as well. I just think the Spino is the superior underwater creature, just generally. This thing has more speed than the Barry, and obviously it has the added damage, and it's still really agile too. And considering the underwater cave entrances and underwater caves are so massive on the island anyway, you're not going to struggle to get a Spino down, and in there it is ridiculously easy, and you're a heavy damage dealer. You just need to be careful of obviously all the jellyfish and the electric eels and the oxygen which comes with the Spino as well. They're your only real downsides, but just considering how mobile this creature is and versatile again, like the Maywing, it's a better underwater creature than the Maywing, by the way, because of just all the added damage and defense, which is something the Maywing lacks in. It is just such a versatile general travel mount as well. It's great on the land, it's great for boss fights, it's just great for going around the map, obviously being a nice travel mount, and it can deal hefty amounts of damage, especially considering it can stand up on its hind legs ever since the TLC, which is just a nice, neat ability for it to have. And on top of that, which I haven't even mentioned yet, which I probably should have earlier, they have the hydration buff too, so when they're in the water they deal even more damage and just have an even better buff applied to them when they're in the environment. So it's going to make them even more powerful and even more formidable to all other things that will be in the ocean trying to get into your way. But really, do be careful of the electric eels and jellyfish. You might underestimate them, but if you get yourself caught in a stun lock, it's not going to be a good time for you or your Spino. But apart from that, really, gold star creature deserves to be here. In at number 3, we have got the Basilosaurus. Come on, it does need to be here. Its immunity to electric eels and jellyfish is really something insane. Should I give an honorable mention to the Basilosaurus as well, as I've heard that has the same ability. I haven't tested it enough to warrant it being on the list, but actually I do want you to comment down below, if you use the Basilosaurus in an underwater environment, how does that actually act? Because I want to know, and actually I will test it out throughout the week, because I'm playing around with some of the new creatures more. But yeah, comment that down below if there's something which I definitely like to know. The Basilo is really an ideal caving creature though, although yes, it does have that depth limit which you need to be careful of. The immunity to electric eels and jellyfish, and also just general speed, make it ideal for the job. Also, I'm pretty confident it doesn't have an oxygen stat as well. They can jump to and make little rainbows if that's your thing as well. They can also make oil on top of this, so if you want some slow oil farms, it's really not the fastest thing in the world, then you can have the Bass on your side, and obviously the X-Bachelor is on Gen 1 if you want an even better version. Next up, we've got the Shadowmane, and I have to put this creature here because in my opinion it is really one of those good ones. It has the hydration buff from a start like the Spino, but it is much smaller and in my opinion much more agile, and it still does all of that heavy dealing damage. On top of this as well, it does have a pack buff, so if you're going down with some friends or you just bring some more along with you, then you can have an even bigger advantage in underwater environments. I'm pretty sure they do have an oxygen buff though, so be careful with that. They have natural armor and require no saddle, so that's an even bigger benefit. Less resources to get these things, and also just come on, these creatures really do pack a punch. I probably said it earlier because it just needs to be mentioned really. Come on, they deal so much damage, they're so fast and agile in the water, packed with abilities. They have that hydration buff, so they're going to be great for underwater caving, great for underwater bosses, and great for anything that you might want to do in an underwater environment in Ark, and that is why they deserve to be in the number 2 spot in my opinion. So let's get on to the creature that actually tops the list today. In number 1, I have put the Bloodstalker. It was there the last time I think I did one of these videos, but I've obviously updated the list a bit more now, and I will continue to update my list as obviously the channel goes forward. But this is still topping the list of the best underwater mounts out there. It is just so agile on land and in water. It really does add to the versatility of this creature. You can also see all the aggros of the tames around you, so you can see what creatures to aggro to easily evade danger before it even comes near to you. And they are zippingly fast in an underwater environment. Although maybe they don't have the damage capacity to defeat bosses, they still have the damage available to easily kill quite a lot of creatures around them. You'd be surprised how much damage a Bloodstalker can actually deal if you really put them to work in a scenario like this. If you get a good Bloodstalker, you're going to be having a good time with that. Good mobility, good damage, and great versatility, as you don't need to simply cry out your creature or something like that when you hop out of the water. You can just keep traveling around the map with these things, and obviously they're just useful for general travel and just around the map. They are nice companions to have too. They really are very, very versatile tames. Just as a versatility list, they would definitely be up there. The only thing obviously they lack is you're not going to be killing any moders with these things, and they don't have any upgraded variants like some of the creatures that I've mentioned on the list, but they're already so good and just so overpowered in my opinion that I think they deserve the #1 spot. But comment down below your thoughts if you feel like maybe there should be another creature in at the #1 spot, and actually what is your favourite underwater mount out there. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. As always, comment down below if you didn't agree with this list, as I would like to know your thoughts, and if you didn't agree with this list, put your 10 actually in the comments below. I'll see you all later.